I thought I was the kind of man who didn't miss things. 31 years working as a loan officer at a regional bank in Raleigh will do that to you. You learn to read the small print. You learn to notice when something's been signed too fast or when the numbers look clean in a way that real numbers never quite are. My colleagues used to joke that I could smell a discrepancy from across the room. My wife Helen, God rest her, used to say I was the most suspicious, trusting man she'd ever met. I never quite understood what she meant by that until last spring. Helen passed 4 years ago. Breast cancer. We had 38 years together, and I will not sit here and pretend that the house didn't get very quiet after she was gone. My daughter came home for the funeral, stayed 2 weeks, and then went back to her life in Charlotte with her husband. That's the natural order of things. I understood it. I didn't begrudge her. What I'm about to tell you happened in the months that followed my retirement. I had stepped away from the bank in January, right after the new year, after 31 years. People asked me how it felt. I told them it felt like taking off a shoe I'd worn so long I'd forgotten I was wearing it. The house was quiet. My routine was mine again. I started growing tomatoes in the backyard, started walking 3 miles every morning through the neighborhood, started calling my old friend Robert every Sunday the way we used to when we were both too busy during the week. Robert and I go back to our early 20s. We met at a job fair in Durham and ended up at the same bar afterward complaining about the same things young men complain about. He went into IT infrastructure. Spent decades doing network security for a government contractor up in Northern Virginia before he retired and moved back south to be near his sister. If I am a man who notices small print, Robert is a man who notices the machinery behind the print. He thinks in systems. Always has. The gift came on a Thursday in late March. My daughter called first to say she and her husband were coming up for the weekend, which they did maybe 3 or 4 times a year. I was glad. The house felt less like a museum when there were people in it. Her husband, I'll call him my son-in-law because that's what he is, had always been pleasant, polite, the kind of man who carries the dishes to the sink without being asked and compliments the food twice. I had no complaints about him, none that I could name. They arrived Saturday afternoon. My daughter brought a peach cobbler she'd made herself, which told me she was in a good mood because she only bakes when she's happy. Her husband brought a large box he carried in from the truck with both hands and set on the kitchen table with the careful deliberateness of someone presenting something they'd thought about. He said it was for my retirement, said he'd been meaning to get it for a while but wanted to wait until I'd actually settled in at home. Said he knew I was alone out here and he just wanted to make sure I felt safe. It was a home automation hub. Top of the line, the kind of system that connects to your thermostat, your door locks, your lights, and your cameras, all through one app on your phone. He spent the better part of Saturday afternoon setting it up. I sat in the kitchen and watched him move through the house with the comfort of a man who knows exactly what he's doing. He installed 2 exterior cameras, one over the front door and one at the back. He walked me through the app on my phone, showed me how to check the live feeds, how to set motion alerts, how to unlock the front door remotely if I ever needed to let someone in. I remember thinking, this is a good man. My daughter found herself a good man. That evening, the 4 of us sat on the back porch and ate the cobbler and watched the light go orange over the tree line. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a while. Not quite happy, but close to it. Settled. They left Sunday morning. Robert came by the following Tuesday, the way he did most Tuesdays, to drink coffee and argue about baseball. I showed him the new system. I was proud of it, if I'm being honest. I pulled up the app and showed him the camera feeds, the door lock controls, the whole setup. He looked at the phone the way he used to look at network diagrams back in his working days, quiet. Still. Not impressed the way a regular person gets impressed, but thinking. He asked me what brand the hub was. I told him. He nodded slowly and asked if he could see the router settings. I didn't think anything of it. I handed him my laptop and went to refill the coffee. When I came back, he was sitting very straight in the chair. He had a look on his face that I had not seen before. Not alarmed exactly, more like the face of a doctor who has found something on a scan and is deciding how to say it. He said, "How many devices are registered as administrators on this system?" I said I assumed just mine, my phone. He turned the laptop toward me. There were two administrator accounts. Mine, set up with my email address the Saturday my son-in-law installed the system, and another one, registered to an email address I did not recognize, set up the same day at almost the exact same time. I stared at the screen for a moment. I asked Robert what that meant. He said it meant that someone else had full access to the system, not just due access. Administrator access. They could see every camera feed. They could see the motion history. They could see the motion history. They could see every time a door was unlocked and when. They could change the settings. They could, if they wanted, download the recorded footage. I sat down. Robert closed the laptop carefully and set it on the table between us. He said he wasn't going to tell me what to think. He said he was going to tell me one thing, and then he was going to let me sit with it. He said that second account was set up from a device that wasn't in this house. I didn't say anything. He said it was set up remotely. Before he arrived, he came here with administrator access already configured. He just needed your Wi-Fi password to activate it. I had given my son-in-law my Wi-Fi password 8 months earlier when they visited for Thanksgiving. I had written it on a sticky note because I could never remember it, and I'd handed it to him without thinking twice. I want to tell you that I reacted the way you're probably expecting, that I called my daughter immediately, that I confronted him, that I felt a fire come up through my chest, and I did something about it. But I sat in that kitchen for a long time, and I didn't do anything, not yet, because I kept turning the thing over in my mind, and I kept hitting the same wall. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe the second account was some kind of automatic backup registration, some feature of the system I didn't understand. Maybe it was a mistake. I am not a man who grew up assuming the worst of people, and 31 years reading loan applications will actually do the opposite of what you'd expect. It makes you see how many people are just trying, just struggling, just making it through, and how rarely genuine malice is the explanation for any given situation. But Robert is not a sentimental man, and he knows these systems the way I know a balance sheet. I asked him what he thought my son-in-law was looking for. Robert was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "At your age, with a paid-off house, with a retirement pension, and whatever savings you have, what do you think he might want to know?" And there it was, because I had been thinking about my will. Not in a morbid way, just in the practical way that men my age think about these things after they lose a spouse. I had updated it after Helen passed, and I had been quietly revisiting it since my retirement, thinking about what was fair, thinking about the grandchildren I hoped I'd eventually have, thinking about the cousins in the church and the small scholarship fund I wanted to set up in Helen's name at the community college where she used to teach ceramics on Wednesday evenings. I had not told my daughter or her husband what was in the will. I had told them it was updated. Nothing more. Someone watching the camera feeds would know when I came and went. They would know my routines. They would know if I was having people over, if I was going to meetings, if a car they didn't recognize was parked in my driveway for a long stretch of time. They would know if a man in a suit came to visit me on a Tuesday afternoon. That was the thought that finally landed in my stomach like a stone. They would know if I had a lawyer. I want to be careful here because I am not someone who jumps to conclusions. But the question I kept asking myself, the one that would not leave me alone, was this: what kind of person sets up administrator access to a system before they walk into someone's house? What kind of person does that quietly without mentioning it, and then spends a Saturday afternoon teaching you how to use an app that they can already see everything on? It is not the behavior of someone who just wants you to feel safe. I told Robert I needed to think. He said he understood. He said to take whatever time I needed. Then he said one more thing before he left. He said, "Don't change anything on the system yet. Don't remove the account. Don't let them know you found it." I asked him why. He said, "Because right now they think they know what's in your house. That's useful." I turned that over for a week. I am not going to lie to you and tell you it was a comfortable week. It was not. I walked my 3 miles every morning and I looked at the camera over my front door and I thought about the fact that somewhere, on a phone I had never held, someone could pull up my driveway the same way I could. I cooked my dinner and I sat in the chair I've sat in for 20 years and I watched the news and I thought about my wife and I thought about the house she and I had built a life in together and I thought about what it means when the people who are supposed to love you are actually watching you, the way a hunter watches a field. On the ninth day, I called my attorney. Not from my home phone. I drove to the library on Glenwood Avenue and used my cell phone in the parking lot. His name is a man I've worked with for 15 years, handled Helen's estate, a sharp man, straightforward, the kind of attorney who doesn't pad his hours and doesn't waste your time with preamble. I told him what I'd found. He listened without interrupting, which is a quality I deeply appreciate in a person. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I'm glad you called before you did anything." We met at his office the following week. I went on a Wednesday morning, which was unusual for me. I normally run errands on Wednesdays, but I'd made a point of going to the grocery store the day before, so that if anyone was watching the feed, Wednesday looked ordinary. No car in the driveway, no activity. We updated the will completely, not just the distribution, the structure. He advised me on a revocable living trust, which meant the house and certain assets would transfer without going through probate, and more importantly, without becoming a matter of public record. He advised me on how to title certain accounts. We talked about beneficiary designations on the retirement accounts, which operate entirely outside of a will and are therefore considerably harder to challenge or anticipate. When I left his office, I sat in the car for a few minutes. The paperwork was in a folder in my briefcase. Nothing about my driveway looked different. Nothing about my house looked different. But something had changed. I didn't tell my daughter anything. This is the part that people find hard to understand when I tell this story. She is my daughter. I love her. Whatever her husband had or hadn't done, she was still the girl who used to fall asleep watching old movies with her head on my shoulder. She was still Helen's daughter. And I didn't know yet what she knew. I didn't know if she was part of it or if she was simply married to a man she didn't fully see yet. That uncertainty was the hardest thing to carry. 3 weeks after I'd found the second administrator account, my son-in-law called me on a Sunday afternoon. He said he and my daughter were thinking about coming up the following weekend. He mentioned almost in passing that he'd been talking to a financial advisor and that he thought it might be worth the four of us sitting down together and talking about what he called long-term planning. He said it casually, the way people say things they've been waiting to say for a while. I told him that sounded fine. He said great, they'd come up Saturday. I called Robert that evening and told him about the call. Robert said, "He's going to want to know what you've done with the assets." I said, "I know." He said, "What are you going to tell him?" I said I hadn't decided yet. There was a pause, and then Robert said something I've thought about many times since. He said, "You know what's interesting about a man who's been watching your house for months? He thinks he already knows the answer. He's not coming to ask you. He's coming to confirm." And that was the thing about the whole situation that had been sitting wrong with me, that I hadn't been able to name until Robert said it out loud. My son-in-law wasn't suspicious of me. He wasn't worried about me. He was planning. He had been watching my routines, watching who came and went, watching whether any lawyers or financial advisors or accountants had come to the house. And I had been careful enough or lucky enough that none of that had happened at my home address. Everything had happened elsewhere. He thought he knew the shape of my finances. He thought he knew what I had and where it was. He thought that the conversation he was coming to have on Saturday was the first move in a process he had already mapped out. He did not know about the trust. He did not know about the attorney. He did not know that I knew about the second administrator account. Saturday came the way Saturdays do in late spring in North Carolina. Slow, warm, the kind of day that makes you believe everything is manageable. My daughter hugged me at the door, and I held on to that hug a little longer than usual. She smelled like the same shampoo she'd used since she was a teenager, and I had to remind myself to let go and step back and hold my face in the shape of a normal afternoon. Her husband shook my hand and said I looked good. I told him the walking was helping. We sat down after lunch. My son-in-law had brought a folder of his own, printouts from a financial planning website, some notes in his own handwriting, a list of questions. He laid them out on the kitchen table the way a man does when he wants to look organized, when he wants the other person to think he's done his homework. He started talking about estate taxes, about the complexity of probate, about how people his father's age, not me, he was careful to note, but people in general, often didn't realize how much of their estate could be tied up in the process. He talked about the house, specifically. He mentioned gently that the house was presumably my largest asset and that without proper planning it could take years to settle. I listened. I let him talk for probably 20 minutes. My daughter was quieter than I expected. She kept glancing at me in a way I couldn't quite read. At one point she started to say something and then stopped, and he continued talking, and I filed that away. When he finished, I thanked him. I told him it was thoughtful that he prepared all of this. I told him I had actually been working with my attorney on exactly these issues, and that everything was already in order. He went still. Not dramatically, not obviously, but his hands went flat on the table and his expression did that thing expressions do when the calculation behind them shifts, a small delay, a fraction of a second, where the response that was prepared for one outcome has to find a new route. He asked a little too carefully what I meant by in order. I said I had set up a revocable living trust and that the house and my primary accounts had been retitled accordingly. I said my beneficiary designations had all been updated and reviewed. I said my attorney had everything on file. He asked when I'd done this. I said, a few weeks ago. The room was quiet. My daughter was looking at her hands. I want to tell you that I said something sharp then, something satisfying, but that isn't actually what happened. What happened was that I got up from the table and went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water and stood at the window for a moment looking at the tomato plants coming in along the back fence, the ones Helen used to tend, and that I had finally, after 4 years, started tending again. When I came back, my son-in-law had collected his papers. My daughter looked up at me and she said, "Dad, I didn't know he was going to do all that." I believed her. I don't know how much she knew. I don't know how much of it she understood. That's a conversation we've been having slowly, carefully, over the months since, not in a way that resolves cleanly, because family never does, but in the slow, honest way that I think she and I both needed. Her husband and I have not spoken much since that afternoon. There is not a dramatic conclusion to that chapter. He didn't confess to anything. I didn't confront him about the administrator account directly. I had removed it, quietly, 2 days before they arrived, with Robert's help, and I had changed all the passwords and updated the router settings, and as far as I know, he doesn't know that I know. What I know is that the system in my home now has one administrator account, and it belongs to me. I still have the cameras up. They're good cameras. They face outward. What I think about now, when I walk my 3 miles in the morning past the houses of my neighbours, is how much we rely on the assumption that people who say they love us are paying attention to us the way love actually pays attention. Love notices when you're sad. It notices when you haven't been sleeping. It asks how you're doing and waits for the real answer. What my son-in-law was doing was a different kind of noticing entirely. He was watching for evidence. He was building a picture of my life not because he cared about my life, but because he cared about what my life would leave behind. A system installed in your home by someone who has already given themselves access to it is not a gift, it is a position. I'm 67 years old. I worked for 31 years. I built a life with a woman I loved for 38 years. I raised a daughter who I believe, when it came down to it, chose me. And I did not panic. I paid attention. I moved carefully the way a man moves when he has finally understood the board he is playing on. The question I ask myself now, the one I will leave with you today, is not whether you would have caught it. Most people wouldn't have. I almost didn't. The question is, who in your life has a key to a door you didn't know you'd unlocked? Think about that. Think about every password you've shared, every account you've handed someone access to because you trusted them, every system someone else installed and configured and handed back to you, still warm with their fingerprints on every setting. You don't need a camera watching your door to know who loves you. Real love doesn't need to watch. Real love already knows. I still walk the same 3 miles every morning. Same streets, same neighbours waving from their driveways, same turn at the end of Glenwood where the oak trees come in low and the light hits different in the early hours. But I walk differently now, not faster, not more guarded, just more awake. What happened to me wasn't unusual. That's the part I've had to sit with the longest. Men my age, women my age, people who spent decades doing everything right, working, saving, building something real. We become a kind of target when we get quiet, when the house gets paid off and the children grow up and the life we built starts to look, from the outside, like an inheritance waiting to be claimed. I don't say that bitterly. I say it because I think it's important to name the thing clearly, the way my attorney names things clearly, the way Robert names things clearly, without drama, but without flinching either. There's a version of this story where I don't notice, where I accept the gift at face value, the way I accepted so many things at face value across 67 years of trying to think the best of people, where I hand over my Wi-Fi password and my routines and the quiet record of my daily life without ever knowing someone is building a picture of me from a distance. That version of this story ends very differently. I know that. And knowing it is not comfortable. What I've come to understand is that integrity, not just honesty in the easy moments, but the kind of character that holds when no one is watching, when the outcome is uncertain, when the right thing and the easy thing are not the same thing. That's not a quality you develop once and keep forever. It's something you tend. Like tomatoes. You have to show up for it repeatedly, in the small choices, in the moments when you could look away and no one would blame you. Robert showed up for it. He could have looked at that administrator account and said nothing. He could have decided it wasn't his business, that maybe there was an explanation, that friendships don't survive that kind of conversation. He said something anyway. That is what I mean by character. It is quiet, and it is inconvenient, and it does not announce itself. And I think about what it took to sit still for those 9 days, to not react, to drive to the library parking lot, to think before I moved. Every instinct I had wanted to pick up the phone, wanted to confront, wanted resolution immediately. The discipline of waiting, of trusting that patience was not passivity but strategy. That was something I had to choose over and over again across those 3 weeks. Nobody sees that part. Nobody sees the man sitting in his kitchen at 11 at night, turning the thing over for the 100th time, deciding again to wait, to think, to be careful. What I want you to take from this is not fear. I don't think fear is the useful response to what I've told you. What I want you to take is attention. The same steady, clear-eyed attention you'd bring to a loan application, to a contract, to any document where the cost of missing something is too high to ignore. Pay that kind of attention to the people who have access to your life, not with suspicion, with clarity. You built what you built. You earned what you earned. You are allowed to protect it. And the people who genuinely love you will not need a back door to do it.